Hi everybody. I've been meaning to write for the last week or so. I've been thinking about what topics to talk about, and then I thought about doing a video. And this is something that's come up repeatedly in during my seminars, my courses, and also when I'm meeting with friends and stuff. It has to do with like warming up your dog, which also connects to stretching. And I just want to talk about the differences between two different types of stretches. And one's a more traditional that we probably think about when we were back in elementary school, and what we're thinking about now today as far as what's most beneficial. So I want you to think about stretching in two ways. Think about static stretching, passive stretching, and dynamic stretching. So static stretching is used to stretch muscles while the body's at rest. So we usually think about holding these stretches for 10 to 30 seconds. It's composed of various techniques that gradually lengthen a muscle to an elongated position. So I think about a lot of times before gym class, when I'm working out, taking group classes. I did boxing last night as a group class. And we run around, start to warm up, and then we stop, and then we stretch. And a lot of times the coach will have us hold that stretch for a certain amount of time. And we might, have our arm pushed against the wall or do something stretching our legs. And this is static stretching. Now, passive stretching is a form of static stretching in which an external force exerts the limb to move into a new position. This is in contrast to active stretching. Passive stretching, the resistance is normally achieved through the force of gravity on the limb or the body weighing down on it. So, for example, if I take my arm and I push it, let's say I push it against the wall and I lean into it to get maybe a stretch through my shoulder, I'm using gravity, I'm using the force of my body, I'm also using the resistance of the wall as I'm pushing my arm into it as passive stretching. I think of elementary school when we used to pair up with a partner and we'd sit on the floor and we'd stretch our legs apart, and you would hold hands with your partner and one would lean forward and one would lean back, and you would use your partner to do static stretching to hold for 10 to 30 seconds. But then your partner would actually put force on the stretch and would put pressure on the limb in a particular way. And now we're moving into passive stretching. So I think a lot of people are most familiar with, passive stretching has been around a long time, and we used to do it a lot. And when we think about our dogs, we can do passive stretching where we might actually manipulate and hold the leg, and we manually move the leg into position. That would be passive stretching. Now, research has shown that there are times where this type of stretching can actually be detrimental to our dog. If our dog has cold muscles, if we use an external force, whether making use of gravity, an item, our hand, and if we put pressure on the limb, like their leg, let's say their hind leg, and we're physically putting pressure and external force to stretch their leg, there is the possibility that we may go beyond their range of motion, and you could actually create some damage. There's been some research studies that show that in some instances when passive stretching is done on cold muscles, instead of helping to increase performance in dogs, we're actually seeing a decrease in performance and effectiveness in movement. And one of the things is your body has a natural reflex that sometimes whenever you start to hit that position where you're going kind of beyond that comfortable range of motion, that instead of the body relaxing and the muscles elongating, the body has a reflex to actually contract and to tighten those muscles. So what happens is if you trigger that reflex, your muscles are actually tightening instead of stretching and elongating. So currently what we're seeing a lot more focus on is on dynamic stretching. And this is not just for animals. It's actually started, we think about human athletes. So dynamic stretching means a stretch is performed by moving through a challenging but a comfortable range of motion repeatedly, 10 to 12 times. And although dynamic stretching requires a more thoughtful coordination than static stretching because it has movement involved, it has been gaining favor among athletes and coaches, trainers, physical therapists because of the apparent benefits in improving the functional range of motion and mobility in sports and activities. So Dynamic stretching, it's more, if you think about people or dogs moving naturally into a stretch position, you're not using an external force to push, pressure, or force the body into a particular position. The person, the dog, can go into the stretch and they are moving into it so that they're moving into the range of motion that is comfortable for them. And so dynamic stretching is controlled, smooth, and deliberate. And it's not, again, I keep thinking back to elementary school when I was in PE class. It's not the kind of ballistic, the bouncing, stretching, uncontrolled kind of jerky movements that are kind of more the old school stretching techniques. So let me just show you a picture here. So here we see dogs. These are dogs that are stretching on their own. And here, if I use food or, if I use a lure with my hand and I lure them into position, or if I teach them through voice command and luring, and they actually can go into a stretch by voice command only, I am not forcing and physically placing their body into a particular position. It might be that you shape the behavior and the dog naturally does a stretch on their own, such as the dog on the right. You see the dog stretching. And let's say if the dog's doing that on his own, I can mark the behavior and reward it, so that I could actually teach some stretching behaviors by simply shaping the behavior. So these are types of stretches that would be more dynamic stretches. Anytime you can get the dog to move gradually into the position, hold the position on his or her own, is a dynamic stretch. And these are stretches that you can do, initially before you're working your dog. You'd want to do maybe a little bit of trotting around, start to get the heart rate going, get the muscles warmed up. And just, you don't want to do it completely cold turkey on completely cold muscles. You want to get the dog moving around a little bit, walking and trotting, and then doing some dynamic stretching. You can do this before and or after exercise. And one of the things I used to, before studying this, I used to do like more specific stretching exercises before working my dog. And I'm guilty of doing some of the more passive and static stretching beforehand. And that was before I started studying all of this and learning more about the science behind it. Nowadays, I worry for my warm-up for my dog. I'm more concerned with getting the body warmed up, getting the muscles warmed up, getting the cardiovascular systems to start moving and flowing and increasing the blood flow. To me, that's my number one concern. And doing the dynamic stretching is important, but that's secondary, because if my dog's muscles aren't warmed up, if we're not starting to get that cardiovascular system going, increasing the blood flow, it's not going to be very effective just to take my dog out on cold muscles and the muscles are not warmed up. The cardiovascular system is not starting to increase, the pumping of blood and getting things going. I'm really limited in what I'm going to achieve with my dog for a warm-up activity. So for me personally, number one is I really work on walking my dog, trotting my dog, increasing the speed of the trot, slowly getting them to do maybe short sprints to get their body warmed up. I might throw in some of the dynamic stretching, but again, number one is just I want to get that body warmed up and prepped up for activity. I might do some, and you can even do some things like, having the dog do circles and do figure eights between your legs. These are types of things that are including some movement, some flexing and stretching, but also you're also doing it to warm up the muscles as a warm-up activity. So I just wanted to go over that. It's a way, it touches upon my warm-up and also part of my warm-up and also stretching, and that the importance is really, really key, getting the dog's muscles warmed up before you engage in any kind of strenuous and a real active activity with them. And then just be very careful. There are benefits to, having, static and passive stretching. There are ways that we can do that and do it well and do it with warm muscles that we do actually increase the flexibility of the dog. But just a heads up and a warning, you have to be careful, because you could injure the dog, you could hyperextend the muscle in a way and go beyond a range of motion that they're comfortable with before they're ready. So it's advised that you only do those stretches after exercise while the dog's still warmed up, and you definitely know you have the dog, the muscles are warm, you're not doing it on cold muscles. And again, be very, very careful with the range of motion, and that if you're putting an external force on the limb as you're stretching the dog, to be very aware of not going beyond the range of motion that they're comfortable with. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'd love to hear from you, and keep an eye out for my next email and more information coming soon.